You know, um, when you look at a beautifully restored classic car, you expect it to run perfectly.
Right, of course.
Like the paint is absolutely flawless, the chrome is shining, the leather seats look pristine. It even smells like, expensive wax and old money.
Yeah, it looks the part.
Exactly. But then you slide into the driver's seat, you turn the key, and absolutely nothing happens.
Oh, no.
Right. So you pop the hood, and the engine bay is just completely hollow.
Wow.
There are no pistons, no spark plugs, no battery.
It's all just for show. I mean, it could sit in a showroom under those bright halogens and fool absolutely everyone who walks by.
Oh, 100%.
But it can't actually do the one thing it was built to do. It has zero power.
And that hollow engine is the exact danger we are exploring today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get into this.
We are jumping straight into the diaries of David Brainerd today. He was this 29-year-old missionary from the 1700s who realized his own spiritual engine was entirely fake.
Completely hollow.
Right. And he went through this radical transformation that actually ended up triggering a global movement. We're pulling all of this from the compilation of his life put together by the brilliant 18th century theologian Jonathan Edwards.
Yeah, Brainerd's story is just foundational. I mean,
Wow.
if you look at the giants of the modern missionary movement, people like William Carey, Henry Martin, or even Jim Elliot in the 20th century,
Yeah.
they all read Brainerd's diary. They were all radically changed by his example. But, our mission today isn't to just recite historical facts or give some dry theological lecture about the 1740s.
True, not at all. We are looking at how this specific, really intense, fiercely honest diary can help you, the person listening to this right now, deepen your own faith.
Exactly.
We want to extract the lifeblood of Brainerd's experiences so you can, love Christ more passionately and live more fully in your daily life. And we're going to do all of that without getting bogged down in confusing technical jargon.
Because we're taking a life that was lived at a 10 out of 10 intensity and translating it into the everyday reality of your walk with God.
Yes, but, okay, to do that, we have to start long before Brainerd was considered a hero of the faith.
Right, the early days.
We have to look at the years when he was essentially building that hollow classic car.
Yeah, when he was just going through all the religious motions, trying to earn a gold star from God, I guess.
And slowly coming to this devastating realization that his entire spiritual life was just a well-decorated empty shell.
It's a tough place to be.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because his starting point it's pretty bleak.
Oh, very bleak.
He was born in 1718 in Connecticut, and right off the bat, the sources paint this picture of a kid carrying an immense amount of trauma.
Yeah, he's orphaned by the time he's 14. Both his father and his mother die.
Which is just devastating.
That loss absolutely sets the psychological tone for his early years. In his own diary, he describes himself as being somewhat sober and inclined to melancholy right from his youth.
So not exactly a happy-go-lucky kid.
No, not at all. This wasn't a carefree kid running through the New England woods. He was serious, he was heavily burdened, and, well, he was living in an era where the Puritan cultural backdrop was deeply, intensely focused on the eternal state of the soul.
And that Puritan culture, they did not mess around when it came to kids.
No, they didn't.
When he was just 7 or 8 years old, he became absolutely terrified of death. And you look at what he was reading to cope with this. He mentions an incredibly popular book from that era called Janeway's Token for Children.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
If you dig into what that book actually was, it is mind-blowing.
It really is.
The subtitle is literally something like, An Exact Account of the Conversion, Holy and Exemplary Lives, and Joyful Deaths of Several Young Children.
Yeah, joyful deaths.
Right. It was essentially a manual designed to scare kids into being pious by constantly reminding them that they might die at any moment.
Which is just, the psychological weight of that on an orphan child is staggering.
I can't even imagine.
Right. It bred this culture of morbid introspection. So Brainerd became completely obsessed with his soul's condition. He was praying constantly, just terrified of stepping out of line. He says at one point that he was almost persuaded to be a Christian.
That phrasing, though, almost persuaded, that's chilling. Because looking at his life from the outside, You would think he was the ultimate super Christian.
Oh, yeah, he was incredibly strict with himself. I mean, the sources detail how he read his Bible all the way through twice in less than a year.
Twice.
Twice. And he was meeting secretly with other young people on Sunday evenings just to repeat the sermons they had heard that morning.
Wow.
He was fasting. He was isolating himself to pray. So to anyone in his community looking at him, he was the absolute model of Puritan devotion.
But wait, hold on. I'm struggling with this a bit.
Sure.
You're saying he was reading his Bible twice a year, meeting with friends to discuss sermons, praying constantly, and this was his problem. If someone did that in a modern church today, we would immediately put them on staff. We'd make them an elder. How on earth is reading the Bible and praying a bad thing?
Well, the activities themselves are not the problem. Reading the Bible and praying are, essential disciplines.
Right.
The problem was the mechanism operating underneath those activities. Brainerd was relying on what he called his good frames.
Good frames. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so in his vocabulary, a good frame was essentially an emotional high or a feeling of extreme sincerity.
Okay, got it.
He would pray with a lot of emotion, maybe shed some tears during a sermon, feel a deep sense of solemnity, and then he would conclude, oh, because I feel so devoted right now, God must be pleased with me. My performance is securing my salvation.
Ah. It's like a failing company cooking the books before an audit.
That's a great way to put it.
Brainerd was inflating his spiritual revenue, counting every tear, every prayer, every Bible chapter as a profit, just trying to convince God and himself that he was this blue-chip stock.
Yep.
But underneath it all, he was spiritually bankrupt. He was basically building a resume for God.
And that resume building is the absolute essence of moralism. And honestly, it is rampant today.
Oh, for sure.
We might not use 18th century language like good frames, but the underlying psychology is identical. I mean, people go to church, they serve on the hospitality team, they tithe, they lead small groups.
Right, they check all the boxes.
But deep down, their internal narrative is, look at my honest, faithful endeavors. God owes me a good life. God owes me salvation because I am putting in the work.
Yeah.
But relying on that self-effort completely blinds a person to their need for grace. As long as Brainerd thought his outward performance could save him, he didn't actually need Jesus to be a savior.
That completely flips the traditional script. Because if Jesus is just this cosmic boss handing out promotions based on your spiritual resume, then you aren't looking for a savior at all.
No, not
You're looking for an employer. You just want compensation for your hard work.
Exactly. And that dynamic eventually created this unbearable tension for him. Because Brainerd was too honest to keep cooking the books forever.
Right.
He started reading the scriptures incredibly closely, and he looked at the sheer absolute strictness of God's law. He realized the law didn't just judge his outward actions, it judged his internal motivations, his fleeting thoughts, his secret pride.
Which is terrifying if you're trying to be perfect.
Oh, completely. He would make these ironclad resolutions to be perfectly holy, and then he would inevitably break them.
He even writes about getting angry at God during this period, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Because he felt like the rules were rigged. He looked at verses like Mark 16:16, which says, "He that believeth not shall be damned," and it just sent him into a spiral of terror.
Right.
Because he realized he couldn't just manufacture true saving faith by trying harder. He couldn't force himself to love God just by reading the Bible more times.
No, he couldn't. He was trying to flex a spiritual muscle that simply did not exist in his natural state. And this is where the theology of the era, the distinction between a covenant of works and a covenant of grace, comes into sharp focus in his actual lived experience.
Oh, so.
Well, Brainerd had to come to the absolute terrifying end of himself. He had this moment where he felt the dread of standing, in his own words, naked before God, stripped of all goodness.
Wow. Stripped of all goodness.
Yeah. He had to realize that his best efforts, his tears, his intense prayers were all completely useless as currency to buy salvation.
Standing stripped of all goodness. I mean, that is a devastating place for a high achiever to be.
Absolutely devastating.
You are out of options. You are out of self-confidence. The hollow engine is just completely exposed.
Yes.
And that realization, that total destruction of his self-reliance is what finally shatters that good outside.
It is. It's a profoundly painful psychological process, but it is the necessary preparation of the heart. I mean, you cannot receive a gift if your hands are already full of your own accomplishments.
That's so true.
And this internal collapse brings us to July of 1739. So Brainerd is 21 years old. He is walking in a solitary place, which was, his habit,
Always in the woods.
always in the woods. And the diaries describe him as being completely bewildered in a tumultuous state of mind, having essentially exhausted every single religious strategy he knew.
And this is where the breakthrough happens.
Yes.
This is the turning point that shifts the entire trajectory of his life and, frankly, the trajectory of Christian missions history.
It really does.
So he is walking alone, and suddenly he experiences this overwhelming, transformative sense of divine glory. But we need to pump the brakes here and be incredibly precise about what actually happened.
Very precise.
Because Jonathan Edwards, who compiled this diary, makes a massive deal out of clarifying what this encounter was not.
Right. Edwards was highly concerned with distinguishing true spiritual awakening from what he called enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm.
Which meant something different back then, right? Exactly. During the 1740s, the Great Awakening was sweeping through the colonies, so it was a time of massive religious revival, but it also brought a lot of emotional excess. People were fainting, having visions, claiming to hear audible voices from heaven.
Just a lot of chaos.
A lot of chaos. And Edwards labeled that kind of imagination-driven fanaticism as enthusiasm.
So Brainerd didn't see a literal light shining through the trees. He didn't have like a hallucination of Jesus hanging on a cross or hear a booming voice telling him he was forgiven.
Nothing of the sort. Edwards points out that if your faith is based on a hallucination, you are just trusting your own imagination, which is highly fallible.
Makes sense.
What Brainerd experienced was an inward apprehension. He wrote, "Unspeakable glory seemed to open to the view and apprehension of my soul. It was as if a veil was lifted from his mind, and he just saw the supreme excellency and beauty of who God actually is."
So he saw the logic of the gospel, not just the rules. The way the sources describe it, it sounds like he finally understood grace. Not as a theological concept to memorize for a test, but as a breathtaking reality. He stopped trying to make a bargain with God, and he just fell in love with God's character.
And that is the core mechanism of true conversion in Brainerd's life. Before this moment in July 1739, his entire religious life was driven by a sheer terror of hell.
Right, joyful deaths, right.
Exactly. He was trying to be good strictly so God wouldn't punish him. But after this moment, his religion is driven by an overwhelming love for God's beauty.
It's a complete shift.
It is.
Yeah.
Edwards summarizes it by saying his joy was joy in God and not in himself. He wasn't happy just because he felt he had finally secured his fire insurance, He was happy because he saw that God is glorious.
Let me jump in here with a very practical question.
Sure.
Because I can imagine a listener driving to work right now, hearing about this unspeakable glory and thinking, I want that.
Yeah.
I want my religion to be driven by love, not just a fear of getting in trouble.
Yeah, of course.
But how do you actually know the difference between an authentic, life-changing spiritual encounter with God and just a fleeting emotional high? Like, how do you know you aren't just whipping yourself into a frenzy of fake enthusiasm?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. And it's one of the primary reasons Jonathan Edwards published Brainerd's diary in the first place.
Oh, really?
Yes. Edwards wanted to give the world a case study in true devotion. He provides clear criteria to test these experiences.
Okay, what are they?
First and foremost, true devotion is always deeply rooted in the objective truth of Scripture. It isn't just a random mystical feeling. It aligns perfectly with the character of God as revealed in the Bible.
So it's tethered to reality, not floating off into the clouds.
Precisely that. Second, a true encounter with God fundamentally humbles you.
Humbles you, okay.
Because fake enthusiasm puffs up the ego. It makes a person think, oh, I had a vision, therefore I am spiritually elite. I am better than the people sitting in the pews around me.
We've all seen that.
Right. But when Brainerd saw the true glory of God, it put him in the dust. It made him acutely aware of his own smallness and his absolute dependence on grace.
It crushes pride instantly.
Yes.
And what's the third criteria?
Lasting holy living.
Ah.
Because an emotional high, a manufactured good frame, it fades by Monday morning. You go to a retreat, you cry during the worship music, and 3 days later you are back to yelling at your kids and cutting people off in traffic.
Right. The high wears off.
Exactly. But Brainerd's encounter fundamentally and permanently shifted his appetites. He wanted to be holy. The long-term fruit of his life proved the reality of that brief inward experience in the woods.
But, we have to be really careful not to sell a false narrative here.
What do you mean?
Well, sometimes we tell these stories in a way that implies once you truly encounter Jesus, all your problems vanish. Like the sky is perpetually blue, the birds are singing, and you never struggle with doubt or sadness again.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a dangerous myth.
Because for Brainerd, this breakthrough actually launched him into a lifelong, intensely personal, and sometimes agonizing battle to maintain that closeness with God.
Absolutely. His conversion was not the end of the story. It was the starting gun. Brainerd viewed the Christian life not as a one-time event where you just punch your ticket to heaven, but as a relentless daily walking with God.
And his private devotion was staggering. I mean, much of it was done in absolute secret.
Yeah.
We're talking about hours upon hours spent in secret prayer. He would go deep into the woods, sometimes in the dead of New England winter, kneeling in the snow until he was sweating through his clothes from the sheer physical intensity of his praying.
It's hard to even comprehend that level of focus.
And he practiced intense fasting. He had this ravenous, consuming longing for personal holiness. There's a quote from the diary that just stops you in your tracks.
Which one?
He wrote, "1 hour with God infinitely exceeds all the pleasures and delights of this lower world."
Wow.
And he wasn't speaking poetically. He meant that as a literal statement of fact.
He really did. But, to understand that level of intensity, we have to confront a major theme in his diaries that makes a lot of modern readers very uncomfortable.
Right, the melancholy.
Yeah. Alongside these soaring spiritual highs, Brainerd battled severe, debilitating darkness. He suffered from what his contemporaries called melancholy.
But in today's medical terms, we would undoubtedly diagnose him with clinical major depressive disorder.
Without a doubt. There were days, sometimes weeks, where he was essentially bedridden, enveloped in a fog of despair, feeling utterly desolate and wishing for death.
Which feels like a massive contradiction to a lot of people.
It does.
They look at this great spiritual giant, a guy who prays in the snow, and they think, wait, why is he so depressed? Doesn't the joy of the Lord fix brain chemistry? Shouldn't his faith cure his depression?
And that assumption is exactly why Jonathan Edwards' commentary on Brainerd's life is a pastoral masterpiece.
Yeah.
Yes, because Edwards makes a revolutionary distinction, especially for the 18th century. He explicitly states that Brainerd's religion was not melancholy.
Meaning they aren't the same thing.
Exactly. He separates the clinical disease of the mind from the spiritual state of the soul. Edwards points out that Brainerd had a physiological constitutional illness. True Christian experience doesn't mean you are immune to mental health struggles, just like it doesn't mean you are immune to a broken leg.
That level of nuance in the 1740s is staggering.
It's incredible.
He is essentially saying, do not confuse his broken brain chemistry with a lack of faith.
Right. And as Brainerd matured, he actually learned to distinguish between the two himself.
He did.
Yeah, he learned the difference between godly sorrow, which is a healthy spiritual conviction of sin that leads to repentance, and the irrational, crushing weight of his own mental illness.
Wow. The application for us today is just profound.
It really is.
Brainerd teaches us how to navigate the dark times.
Yeah.
Because the Christian life is dynamic. It is not a flat line of constant emotional euphoria.
Right.
When Brainerd felt distant from God, whether it was due to his depression or just spiritual dryness, he didn't just shrug it off. He teaches us to mourn the absence of God's conscious presence.
And that mourning is a sign of life.
Yes. It's exactly like a marriage.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you haven't had a real meaningful conversation with your spouse in 3 weeks, you don't just sit on the couch, look at your wedding ring and say, oh, well, I guess we're technically married on paper. I've got the certificate in a drawer somewhere.
No, of course not.
Right. If you have a healthy marriage, you mourn that distance. You feel the pain of the disconnect visceral in your gut, and you do whatever it takes to reconnect. You cancel your weekend plans, you set aside the distractions, you turn off the TV, and you pursue them.
That analogy captures Brainerd's exact posture towards secret prayer.
Yeah.
Because when we feel distant from God today, our modern instinct is to numb the pain. We turn on streaming services, we scroll endlessly through social media, we fill our schedules with noise to distract ourselves from the internal emptiness.
We just try to ignore it.
Right. But Brainerd did the exact opposite. He sought God in those secret duties. He went to the woods. Or for a listener today, maybe it's your closet or your parked car on your lunch break, and you pour out your heart until that relational connection is restored.
And the most inspiring part is that even when the depression didn't lift, and even when his physical health began to fail, because he was also battling advanced tuberculosis for years, he never abandoned God.
Never.
He didn't use his suffering as an excuse to walk away.
And what we see in Brainerd is an incredibly robust theology of suffering.
A theology of suffering. Tell me more about that.
Well, he understood that God can use our mental health struggles, our deep isolation, and our physical ailments to strip away our self-reliance and deepen our absolute dependence on him.
Wow.
Brainerd experienced God's covenant love not by escaping his suffering, but right in the very center of it. His suffering acted like a crucible, burning away everything else until he was left with God alone.
So you have this guy, bedridden with clinical depression, coughing up blood from tuberculosis, agonizing over his own internal purity and his secret prayer life.
Right.
On paper, it sounds like the absolute perfect recipe for a total hermit.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would expect him to retreat to a monastery, lock the door, and just focus entirely on his own internal spiritual state until he died.
And he didn't.
He didn't. How does this intense internal obsession explode outward into trekking hundreds of miles into dangerous frontier territory?
That outward explosion is what changes history.
Yeah.
Brainerd realized that if the gospel is true, and if God is as supremely beautiful as he experienced in that woods in 1739, then that reality cannot be contained in a private journal.
It has to get out.
True internal fire demands oxygen, and it demands to spread. And this brings us to his public action, becoming a missionary to the Native Americans.
And he didn't just go to a comfortable, established parish. He went into incredibly harsh frontiers.
Yeah.
Places like Conomeek, the Forks of the Delaware,
Yeah.
and Crossweeds.
Yeah, really remote areas.
We have to paint a picture of the physical realities here, because it is almost impossible for us to comprehend today. He is constantly traveling on horseback or just walking on foot through untamed wilderness.
With no roads.
No roads. He is sleeping out in the freezing woods in the dead of winter. He has advanced tuberculosis, so he is literally coughing up blood in the snow.
It's just brutal.
And he is dealing with intense, crushing loneliness, living miles away from anyone who spoke his language or shared his culture.
And he is entering a deeply complex cultural and political situation.
Why, for sure.
I mean, the Native American tribes he was trying to reach had been horribly mistreated, cheated, and abused by white European settlers. They had every historical and logical reason to be deeply suspicious of this colonial man showing up in their territory.
Yet, despite the physical agony and the cultural barriers, he absolutely refuses to quit. But what fascinates me most is how he approached them.
Yes, his method.
Because his method was completely counterintuitive to how a lot of missions were done back then. He didn't lead with moralism. He didn't ride into the camp and hand them a list of European rules to follow.
No, because he had learned from his own bitter experience that the good outside approach is a dead end.
Right.
He knew that if he just went in and said, stop drinking, stop fighting, start dressing and acting like English colonists, and then God will accept you, he would just be creating hollow engines.
Exactly. He would be building the same fake religion that almost destroyed him.
Exactly. So instead of preaching rules, he preached what the Apostle Paul calls Christ crucified.
It's just the gospel.
Yes. He focused entirely on the love of God, the misery of fallen humanity, and the complete all-sufficient rescue provided by Jesus.
There is a very specific, detailed anecdote in the diaries that perfectly illustrates this.
Oh, the powwow story.
Yes, the conjurer.
Oh, yes. So Brainerd encounters a Native American conjurer, a powwow, who was deeply entrenched in the spiritual practices of his tribe. There was a major idolatrous feast and a frantic dance taking place, which was central to their cultural and religious identity.
This is a huge event.
Massive event. And the tension in that moment is palpable. You have this sick, isolated colonial missionary standing in the middle of a massive, culturally entrenched religious festival.
The power dynamic is totally against Brainerd.
Completely against him. But Brainerd doesn't confront the powwow with anger or moral shaming. He doesn't just yell at them to stop dancing.
Which a lot of people would have done.
Oh, absolutely. But instead, he introduces a superior beauty. He preaches the gospel. And against all odds, this powwow is converted. He experiences a total radical heart change.
Okay, we need to break down the mechanism of that conversion.
Sure.
Why did a Native American conjurer, steeped in his own powerful traditions, care at all about a sick colonial preaching about a crucified man? Like, why did preaching the mysteries of grace work when yelling at them to stop dancing would have failed?
Because behavior modification can only restrain the flesh.
Okay.
If Brainerd had just told them to stop their practices, they might have stopped out of annoyance or fear, or maybe to get economic favors from the colonists, but their hearts would still crave their old ways.
Right.
It's like putting a wild animal in a cage. The cage restrains the behavior, but it doesn't change the nature of the animal. It still wants to bite you.
But grace changes the actual nature of the animal.
Exactly. When Brainerd preached the unsearchable riches of Christ, when he painted a vivid picture of how beautiful, merciful, and forgiving Jesus is, even to people who are completely broken, it captured their imaginations.
It changed what they wanted.
It changed the appetite of their souls. When you realize that you are deeply flawed, yet infinitely loved and forgiven at the cost of Christ's life, it produces a profound gratitude.
There is an old phrase that sums this up perfectly. Love constrains obedience.
Yes.
When you truly love Christ, you actually want to obey him. You don't need a cage anymore.
Brainerd proved that the gospel of grace is actually the most practical, transformative force in the world. By focusing purely on the spiritual reality of grace, rather than a checklist of moral rules, he saw entire communities fundamentally transformed socially and morally.
And the diaries record this, right?
Oh, yeah. The diaries record how these communities gave up drunkenness, they settled long-standing blood feuds, they started caring for the vulnerable among them, and they did it not because they were given a rule book, but because their hearts had been captured by the beauty of God.
That is just incredible. But, this relentless, completely unselfish pouring out of himself for these communities inevitably led to the total breakdown of his physical body.
It did.
He was literally working himself into an early grave. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most profound lesson of his life, living with eternity in view.
To truly grasp the magnitude of how Brainerd faced his death, we actually need to rewind a bit. We need to look at an incident from his earlier years that shaped his earthly trajectory.
Oh, the Yale incident.
Yes. When he was a young student at Yale, right in the boiling middle of the Great Awakening, tensions were incredibly high between the faculty who opposed the revivals and the students who supported them.
Right, it was highly politicized.
Very. And in a private conversation, Brainerd made an indiscreet, off-the-cuff comment about one of the college tutors, saying the man had no more grace than a chair.
Ouch. A great insult, but a terrible career move.
Yeah, exactly. A freshman was eavesdropping, reported it to a woman who reported it to the rector, and the situation just blew up. Despite Brainerd's repeated, humble apologies, Yale expelled him.
And that was a huge deal back then.
Massive. In the 1740s, being expelled from Yale meant his dreams of becoming a traditional, settled minister were completely, irreversibly crushed. A law had just been passed saying no one could be an established minister in Connecticut without a degree from Yale or Harvard.
It was a devastating blow. It derailed his entire life plan.
Yeah.
He could have been bitter. He could have spent the rest of his life writing angry pamphlets about how unfair the Yale administration was.
Many people would have. But as he nears the end of his life, we see the true, undeniable fruit of his faith. He showed absolutely zero resentment toward Yale or the people who ruined his plans.
Zero.
Zero. In fact, he took the small inheritance he had left and used his own money to sponsor another student's education at Yale.
That is wild. Talk about a kingdom mindset.
Isn't it?
He didn't care about his own bruised ego or his legacy. He just cared about getting more laborers into the field. He funded the education at the very institution that kicked him out.
And that radical heavenly mindedness became his defining characteristic. He spent his final months living at Jonathan Edwards' house in Northampton. He is 29 years old.
Just 29.
His body is completely wasting away from consumption. He is in tremendous, agonizing physical pain. But spiritually, his diaries show a man who is absolutely soaring.
There was a quote from his deathbed that is just etched into my mind. As he is suffering, he says, "If I had 1,000 lives, my soul would gladly have laid them all down at once to have been with Christ."
1,000 lives.
1,000 lives. He wasn't clinging to this world for a single second.
His dying prayers reflect that complete detachment from earthly comfort. As he lay there in Edward's house, struggling for every single breath, he wasn't praying for pain relief. He wasn't begging for miraculous physical healing.
What was he praying for?
His mind was entirely consumed with the flourishing of Christ's kingdom on earth. He was using his last breaths to pray fervently for the global spread of the gospel and for his Native American congregation.
Wow. So we have to ask the hard question here. What does this all mean for us today?
It's a challenging thought.
Because we live in a modern culture, even a modern church culture, that is absolutely obsessed with self-care, comfort, and maximizing our personal longevity.
Right.
We want to live to be 100, we want our lives to be pain-free, and we want to retire on a beach.
Right.
And here is Brainerd, dying in agony at 29, and Jonathan Edwards holds him up as the ultimate success story of the Christian life.
Because Brainerd shatters our modern idol of comfort. He shows us that a life poured out for Christ is never, ever wasted.
Never wasted.
No. God measures faithfulness, not comfort. God measures devotion, not longevity. Brainerd didn't view his early death as a tragedy that was unfairly cutting his life short.
He didn't feel cheated.
Not at all. He viewed death as the ultimate healing, the final release from his battle with sin and depression, and the glorious entrance into perfect holiness, which is what he had been panting after since he was 21 years old. He literally wanted to wear out his life in his service.
You know, we actually understand this mindset perfectly well in other areas of life. We just rarely apply it to faith.
What do you mean?
Well, think about sports. An Olympic gymnast or a professional football player will literally destroy their knees, subject themselves to agonizing physical therapy, endure grueling diets, and sacrifice their entire youth just to stand on a podium and win a piece of metal that will eventually gather dust in a trophy case.
Right, and we applaud that.
We call it dedication. We make Nike commercials about it.
Yeah.
Brainerd did the exact same thing with the exact same level of physical intensity, but for eternal glory. He gladly traded a few decades of earthly comfort for an eternity of joy and for the salvation of souls that will last forever.
That is the perfect framework for it. The question isn't whether we will spend our lives. We are all spending our time, our energy, and our health on something.
We're all wearing out our engines.
Right. The question is what we will spend them on. Brainerd chose to spend his on the only thing that outlasts the grave.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's do a quick super summary to pull all of these massive concepts together for the listener.
Sure. If we distill the chaotic, intense, beautiful life of David Brainerd down to its absolute essence, it teaches us 4 things.
Okay, what's the first?
First, we must aggressively abandon our reliance on the good outside. We have to stop trying to earn God's favor through our own moral resumes and cooked spiritual books.
So true.
Second, true salvation isn't about fear. It is about falling deeply, fundamentally in love with the supreme beauty and excellency of Christ.
And the third?
Third, the Christian life requires us to fight for daily communion with God. Leaning into secret prayer even, and especially when we are walking through valleys of depression or spiritual dryness.
And the final takeaway?
Finally, we are called to spend our lives boldly and self-sacrificially for others, keeping our eyes firmly fixed on eternity rather than earthly comfort.
Which brings me right back to that beautifully restored classic car we talked about at the very beginning.
The hollow engine.
The hollow engine. If your spiritual life looks great on the outside, if you have the right theology, the right church attendance, the right moral behavior, but you feel completely hollow under the hood, Brainerd's life is an invitation to stop polishing the chrome. Stop pretending. Let the hollow engine be entirely rebuilt by grace. Brainerd famously said he wanted to wear out his life for God. So I want you to think about your own life right now, today.
That's the real question.
Think about your energy, your daily routines, your stress, your bank account. We are all wearing out our lives for something. Maybe it's climbing the corporate ladder, protecting your reputation, building a comfortable retirement portfolio, or just chasing the fleeting approval of strangers on the internet.
Yeah.
You only get one life. You only have one engine to burn out. Is what you are wearing it out for right now truly worthy of the price you're paying? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the life of David Brainerd. We'll catch you next time.